You know, everybody always says they don't make them like they used to, and that Smith & Wesson revolvers used to be so much better when they made them the old way. So let's take a moment today and do a video and see if that's actually true. Hey everybody, Yankee here. I think most of you know I love revolvers. I especially love Smith & Wesson revolvers. And one of the questions I get all the time about the Smiths is, why are the new ones nowhere as good as the old ones? Why were the old ones so much better? Why don't they go back to making the new ones the way they made the old ones so that they would be better? Well, I kind of think that's based on a possible fallacy. Are the older guns actually better? Today I want to actually put that to the test. I want to take two Smith & Wesson revolvers, two Model 66s, one of the newer Combat Magnum here, and one of the older 66-1s here. I want to look at these two guns side by side and see how they compare. Now, when we're looking at these guns side by side, we will look at everything that's different about these two guns, compare them, and we'll judge a winner in each category. The winner will receive 1 point. Now, a lot of these differences are going to be cosmetic or going to be just, basic preference. But some of them will actually be things that make the gun a better gun, make it function better. And if either of the gun wins in a category where it actually makes the gun a better functioning gun, they'll get an extra half point. Now at the end, we'll tally it all up and we'll see, is the old gun better than the new gun, or is it the other way around? Now, one of the big differences between the old gun and the new gun that we'll start off with here is that the older guns had trigger stops. Now, they usually got removed, but they're not put on the newer guns. They're usually not something you see. Now, does this make the gun better either way? Not really, but I do like the fact that they were included on the old guns. That it was the possibility you could actually use it if you wanted to, or take it out if you didn't want it there. But then again, I also say I like the fact that you don't have the slot there anymore. I'm compelled to always put them back when they're missing. This one's still missing one. I haven't put it back yet. But my OCD aside, I'm going to actually go with the older guns because the option's there. On the new guns, the option isn't there. So it's a feature the new ones don't have. The old ones have it. Doesn't affect function, but I prefer the old style with the actual trigger stop. I like having the option. So that's 1 point for the old timers. Now let's look at the actual triggers themselves. They're quite a bit different. The old triggers are a big solid piece of metal. They're a little more plain. They're not as shaped as the new triggers, but they do have serrated fronts on them usually. That's a nice feature. And like I said, they're solid steel. Now the new triggers I think are actually better because they are a more manufactured piece. They're lighter. They're stronger, and they're case hardened. So they give a little contrast to the gun. I like that case hardened finish on the actual trigger. But since the other one is solid steel and does have that serrated front, I'm going to make it a tie. I actually think this is just whichever one you prefer. I do think the new ones are a little bit better, but the old ones have that certain something because they are a big solid piece of steel and they do usually have that serrated front. So like I said, a tie, half a point for each. Now let's look at sights. Now this is one place where there's no competition. Now the rear sights are pretty much the same on both of them, but the front sight on the older gun, it's a fixed blade. It's part of the actual barrel. You can't change it out. It's actually, like I said, part of the gun. On the new guns, they're removable. You can change them. You can put night sights on them. You can do whatever you want. That's just leaps and bounds better. It's just way better. So like I said, as far as the sights go, because of that front sight being removable and replaceable on the new ones, there's no contest. The new guns win this one, so they get a point. And they actually get an extra half point for this one because I think that that better front sight makes it a better gun and improves the function of the gun. It makes it easier to hit your target. Now let's look at the hammers and the firing pins, how the guns actually go off. If you look at the old and new gun, they have similar differences in the hammers between the new and old gun as they do with the actual trigger. The older hammer is a solid piece of steel, finished more like the gun. The new ones are case hardened. They give that little bit of contrast. But the biggest difference is the firing pin and how it's mounted. On the old one, the firing pin is mounted right on the hammer. On the new one, it's internal in the gun. In the old gun, when the firing pin goes forward, it's channeled into a little slot, goes through, and actually strikes the primer. On the new guns, the hammer just goes forward and strikes the firing pin button on the outside, and the firing pin is activated inside the gun and strikes the round. Now, I don't think there's any contest here as to which one of these mechanisms is better, and it's the new gun. In all my experience with guns, I've never had one of the internal firing pins break, ever. Now, as far as the ones mounted on the hammer, I've had several of those break because they are channeled into that little slot and they are more likely to break. They got more sideways movement, etc., because they're mounted out freely on the hammer. They just break more often. Now, they are easier to replace if they do break because they are right there on the hammer, but I would rather never have to replace it than I would have the gun that is just easier to replace. So when it comes to the firing pin, I'm going to give it to the new gun by a margin. And since I do think that makes the gun a better functioning gun, having that more reliable, better mechanism for the firing pin, it's also going to get an extra half point. The new gun gets 1.5 points. Now, when it comes to the safety, both these guns are pretty much the same. They both have a hammer block. That's a little piece that keeps the hammer from going all the way forward unless the trigger is actually pulled. If the trigger isn't pulled, it's up in the way and stops the hammer short of either striking the round or striking the firing pin that's mounted internally. So both of them act the same. So this is going to be a tie, 0.5 point to each. All right, now here's another big difference between the old guns and the new guns. The cylinders themselves. On the older gun, you can see it's machined in. You actually have recessed cylinders. That is much nicer in my opinion. On the new guns, it's more of a flat surface. Now, both of these methods have their strong points and weak points, but I much prefer the old style recessed cylinders. Not only does it look better when it's loaded up, but it looks better when the cylinder's closed. It closes up that gap. You don't see the back of the rounds while they're in there. Now, some people say, oh, this makes it harder to tell if it's loaded. I don't think you're going to have trouble telling a revolver's loaded. So I just don't like the new system as well as I do the old recessed cylinders. So in this case, it doesn't affect function at all, but I do much prefer the old style. A point goes to the old timer. Now, there is one other difference with the cylinder I want to talk about here, and that's the actual star itself, the mechanism that works with the hand to rotate the cylinder. On the new guns, they're much more robust, they're much better designed, they're much less likely to go out of time, so I think they're better on the new guns. I don't like the cylinder as well, but when it comes to the star, the new guns win that. And since that clockwork is better, I think it makes a better functioning gun. I'm also going to give it another 0.5 point. No one wants their gun going out of time. All right, now let's look how they do the cylinder lockup differently. In the back, it's pretty much the same on both guns, but in the front, it's quite a bit different. On the old gun, it's out at the end of the ejector rod. That's not as stable. On the new guns, it's at the front of the cylinder. It's actually in there on the yoke of the gun, so it's much closer to the actual cylinder it's holding. The cylinder is being held right at the front and right at the back. That makes it more stable than the old guns. So the new gun is going to win this one also. And like I said, since it does make it more stable, it makes it a stronger gun, it gets an extra 0.5 point here as well. Now let's look at the actual barrels of the guns. The biggest difference between a lot of the old guns and the new guns is a lot of the old ones use one-piece barrels and a lot of the new ones use two-piece barrels. Now I think the two-piece barrels are a superior design. I like them much better. But there's nothing wrong with the one-piece ones either. And I have never seen anything to tell me that the gun shoots better with one or the other. So on this one, I'm just going to say it's a tie. 0.5 point for each. Now we get to a very controversial difference in the guns, and that's how the barrels are actually fit to the body of the gun. On the old guns, they're screwed in, and then once they get to where they're tight, they're pinned in place. And that's how they keep them right in place. On the new guns, with more precise machinery, they're able to make them to where they're compression fit. So they tighten them as far as they can possibly tighten, and they're made to where once that happens, they're totally perfectly locked up and aligned, and that really locks it in place. It does make it a more sturdy contact. It just makes it an overall stronger connection. But a lot of people don't like the compression fit because of barrel alignment issues. But you know what? A lot of the old barrels were misaligned too. If you look at the old one here, it's actually a little off. The new one is pretty much right on. So it really depends on how well they do it at the factory. But I think either one works just fine. But, since I think there's more leeway with the old barrel and using the pinned method, and some people are going to say, oh, the harmonics and the connection and blah, blah, blah. I don't really understand all that. So I'm just going to say I like the old pinned barrel better. I don't think it affects how the gun functions, so there's no half point involved, but still, I like the old barrels better. I like the pinned barrels. All right, now finally, let's look at just overall fit and finish. Now, since one of these guns is a matte finish and one is their brushed finish, I don't think it's really easy to compare them directly. But if you look at the old gun and a new like Smith & Wesson 686, you'll see I think the fit is a tiny bit better on the new guns. There's very little variance in the gaps. It's just a much straighter gun. I think it's kind of obvious. But the older guns seem to be finished better. If you pay attention, there's not as many flat surfaces. Like the trigger guards, they come to a more rounded off side. They're not just flat on the sides. And that's true of a lot of places on the gun. It's just got a more finished feel to it. So in this case, when it comes to fit and finish, now this is my preference and it doesn't have anything to do with how the gun performs. I think that the old guns just are a little bit nicer because of those finished edges and taking that little extra time to blend stuff together. So the old guns get a point here. So when you look at those categories and look at the two guns side by side, what we end up with is the old gun got 5.5 points. That's not bad. It's a great gun. But the new gun got 7.5 points because of all the differences that affect function. Now, when it comes to finish, I think the old guns are probably better. But when it comes to function, a lot of those new designs like the lockup, the sights, the internal firing pins, all those things make a big difference and they make the new guns better guns. Now, you might disagree with me, but like I said, I've had a lot of experience with revolvers and that's my opinion. If you do disagree, let me know in the comments.